As the Queen prepared to continue to her car, she turned to James with a look that conveyed both understanding and quiet approval. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, having clearly been briefed on the names of her guards. "Thank you for your service. Today." The formal words carried a deeper meaning that James understood completely. His Queen was acknowledging not just his years of dutiful service, but his choice to put humanity before protocol when it mattered most. "Thank you, Your Majesty," James replied, standing even straighter at attention. "It has been my honor." The Queen then looked back at Emma one final time. "Emma, I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit to London. Perhaps we shall meet again someday." Emma practically glowed with happiness. "I hope so too, Your Majesty. I'll practice my curtsy so I can do it even better next time." The Queen laughed, a genuine sound of delight that carried across the courtyard. "I'm sure you will, dear child." With that, she made her way to the waiting car, taking Emma's handmade card with her. As the royal motorcade pulled away, Emma stood, waving until the cars disappeared from view. The crowd began to disperse, but many people approached the barrier where Emma and James stood, wanting to congratulate them or take photos with the little girl who had just met the Queen. James carefully guided Emma back through the barrier to her mother, who immediately swept her daughter into the biggest hug of her life. "Oh, Emma, I'm so proud of you," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "You were so brave and polite. The Queen loved you. She said my dress was lovely, Mummy, and she liked my card, and she said maybe we'll meet again someday." Emma bubbled, over with excitement, recounting every detail of her conversation with the Queen. Sarah looked up at James with overwhelming gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "What you did for Emma today, it means everything to us. You've given her a memory she'll treasure forever." James knelt down to Emma's level, his formal military bearing softening into genuine warmth. "Emma, you were the bravest girl I've ever met today. You should be very proud of yourself." "Will I see you again if we come back to London?" Emma asked hopefully. "I'll be here," James promised. "And I'll always remember the day I met the girl in the beautiful pink dress who made friends with the Queen." Later that afternoon, as James returned to his barracks, he was called into his commanding officer's office. He expected disciplinary action for breaking protocol, but instead, he found something unexpected waiting for him. "Sergeant Mitchell," his superior said, "I've received a call from the palace. It seems Her Majesty was quite impressed with your actions today." He held up a formal commendation. "You're being recognized for exemplary service and for upholding the finest traditions of the Queen's Guard by showing kindness and compassion while maintaining the dignity of your position." James stood in stunned silence. Not only was he not being punished, but he was being honored for his decision to help Emma. "The palace specifically requested that this commendation mention your ability to recognize when the spirit of service is more important than the letter of protocol," his commander continued. "Well done, Sergeant." Meanwhile, Emma's story spread far beyond the palace gates. Videos of her meeting with the Queen were shared millions of times on social media, bringing joy to people around the world. But for Emma herself, the fame meant nothing compared to the memory of standing tall beside a kind guard and making friends with a real queen. Years later, Emma would grow up to become an advocate for people with disabilities, always remembering the day when someone saw past her differences and opened a door that had seemed impossible to open. She kept the photo from that day on her desk, a reminder that kindness has the power to change lives. James continued his service with the Queen's Guard, but he was forever changed by his encounter with Emma. He learned that sometimes the greatest act of service is knowing when to break the rules in favor of something more important. He became known among his fellow guards as someone who understood that their duty wasn't just to stand at attention, but to represent the very best of what their service meant. The handmade card Emma gave to the Queen was kept in the royal private collection, a small reminder of the day when protocol gave way to compassion, and when a little girl's dream became reality because one person chose kindness over conformity. In a world that often seems divided by barriers, their story became a beacon of hope, proving that the most powerful moments happen when we choose to see beyond the rules to the humanity that connects us all. The Queen continued to smile as she approached her waiting car, but instead of proceeding directly to the vehicle, she made an unexpected decision. She turned slightly from her planned route and began walking toward where James and Emma were, standing. The crowd fell into stunned silence as they realized the monarch was deviating from her usual protocol. Emma's eyes grew impossibly wide as she watched the Queen approaching them. She reached up and grabbed James's uniform jacket with her free hand, needing something steady to hold on to as her dream became more incredible than she had ever imagined possible. "Is she coming to see me?" Emma whispered, barely able to speak, from excitement and disbelief. "I think she is," James replied, his own voice filled with wonder. In 15 years of service, he had never seen the Queen make such an impromptu decision to interact with someone from a crowd. The Queen's security detail moved smoothly with her, maintaining their protective formation while allowing her the freedom to make this unexpected connection. Palace officials looked surprised but quickly adapted to their monarch's spontaneous choice. As the Queen drew closer, Emma tried to remember everything her mother had taught her about meeting important people. She released her grip on James's jacket and attempted her best curtsy, wobbling slightly but managing to stay upright. Her pink dress fluffed out around her as she bent her knees, and she looked up at the Queen with a mixture of reverence and pure joy. "Good morning, young lady," the Queen said warmly, her voice carrying the refined accent Emma had heard in movies and television broadcasts. "What a lovely dress you're wearing." Emma's face lit up like sunrise. The Queen had not only noticed her dress, but had complimented it. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Emma managed to say using the formal address her mother had taught her. "Mummy bought it special for meeting you." The Queen's smile deepened. She had met thousands of children over her years of service, but there was something uniquely genuine about Emma's joy that touched her heart. "And what is your name, dear?" "Emma Thompson, Your Majesty," the little girl replied, her speech careful but clear. "I came all the way from Yorkshire to see you." "Yorkshire is a beautiful part of our country," the Queen replied kindly. "You've traveled quite a distance to be here today." Behind the barriers, Sarah was crying openly now, her phone forgotten, in her hand as she watched her daughter having a conversation with the Queen of England. Other tourists around her were taking pictures and videos, but Sarah was completely focused on her little girl, who was handling this incredible moment with such grace and courage. The Queen glanced at James, taking in his protective stance beside Emma. As a monarch who had worked with the military her entire reign, she could read the situation immediately. She understood that this guard had broken protocol to help this special child, and rather than being disapproving, she seemed genuinely pleased by his actions. "And is this your friend helping you today?" the Queen asked Emma, nodding toward James. "Yes, Your Majesty," Emma replied enthusiastically. "He's the kindest guard in the whole world. He helped me see you when I couldn't see over the big people." The Queen looked directly at James, and for a moment, he felt the weight of her assessment. But instead of disapproval, he saw understanding and something that might have been approval in her eyes. "That was very thoughtful of him," the Queen said to Emma, but her words were clearly meant for James as well. "It's important to help others, when we can." James felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. His Queen, the person he had devoted his career to serving, was not angry about his breach of protocol. Instead, she seemed to understand exactly why he had done it. Emma suddenly remembered something important. "Your Majesty, I have something for you," she said, reaching into a small pocket on her dress. She pulled out a handmade card, slightly crumpled from being carried around all morning. "I made this for you," Emma said, offering the card with both hands. "It has a picture of you and me being friends." The Queen accepted the card with the same gracious dignity she showed when receiving state gifts from world leaders. She opened it carefully and looked at Emma's drawing of two stick figures in crowns holding hands with "best friends" written in uneven letters across the top. "This is absolutely beautiful, Emma," the Queen said, and her words carried genuine warmth. "Thank you so much for making this for me. I shall treasure it." Emma glowed with pride and happiness. She had given the Queen a gift, and the Queen had accepted it and said she would treasure it. This moment was beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. The Queen looked once more at both Emma and James, her expression conveying both gratitude and understanding. She had witnessed something beautiful today, a moment where kindness had triumphed over rigid rules, and where a little girl's dream had come true because someone chose compassion over protocol. The palace doors swung open with ceremonial grandeur, and a hush fell over the crowd. Emma stood perfectly still beside James, her eyes fixed on the entrance as palace officials began to emerge. Her small hand reached up unconsciously to smooth her pink dress one more time, wanting to look perfect for this moment she had dreamed about for so long. James felt his heart racing. Though his expression remained calm and professional, he had broken protocol in a way that could end his career. But seeing Emma's face filled with pure joy and anticipation, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever consequences awaited him later would be worth this moment. "Is that her?" Emma whispered as a palace aide stepped out, followed by several security personnel. "Not yet," James replied quietly. "But very soon now." The crowd behind the barriers had grown larger, with more people noticing the unusual sight of a little girl standing with the Queen's guard. Tourists were taking pictures and videos, but James tried to block out their attention. This moment was about Emma, not about creating a spectacle. Sarah watched from behind the barrier with tears streaming down her face. She had seen her daughter face rejection and exclusion so many times because of her disability. Teachers who didn't understand her needs, children who wouldn't play with her, activities that seemed designed for everyone except Emma. But today, a stranger had seen Emma's worth and had chosen to include her in something magical. Emma began to bounce slightly on her toes with excitement, a habit she had when she was particularly happy. "Mr. Guard, do you think the Queen will like my dress?" she asked, looking up at James with complete trust. "I think the Queen will think you look absolutely beautiful," James replied, and he meant every word. There was something radiant about Emma's joy that made everything around her seem brighter. The royal standard fluttered in the breeze above the palace, and more officials emerged from the doors. The crowd's anticipation was reaching its peak, with people pressing against the barriers and cameras being raised high above heads. "Remember to stand very straight and tall when the Queen comes out," James advised Emma gently. "Just like a real guard." Emma immediately straightened her spine and lifted her chin, trying to copy James's perfect military posture. The sight of this little girl attempting to stand at attention in her pink dress was both adorable and deeply moving. Suddenly, there was movement at the palace entrance that signaled the Queen's imminent appearance. Palace guards took their positions, and the crowd fell into an expectant silence. Emma grabbed James's hand not out of fear but from pure excitement. "She's coming, isn't she?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, she's coming," James confirmed, giving her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. The Queen appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a powder blue coat and matching hat, her presence commanding immediate respect and admiration. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Emma stood transfixed, hardly daring to breathe. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Emma was seeing her real-life fairy tale come true. The Queen she had read about in storybooks, the monarch she had dreamed about meeting, was right there in front of her. The little girl who had been hidden behind barriers just minutes ago now had an unobstructed view of royalty. But what happened next would exceed even Emma's wildest dreams. As the Queen made her way down the palace steps toward her waiting car, her gaze swept over the scene before her. The experienced monarch, who had greeted thousands of crowds over her decades of service, immediately noticed something unusual. There, standing beside one of her guards, was a small girl in a pink dress, standing as straight and tall as she possibly could, her face glowing with pure adoration and wonder. The Queen had seen many faces in crowds over the years, but there was something special about this child's expression that caught her attention. The Queen paused in her walkway and looked directly at Emma. Their eyes met across the ceremonial space, and Emma's gasp was audible even over the crowd noise. The Queen smiled, a warm, genuine smile that seemed meant specifically for the little girl standing beside the guard. Emma's knees went weak with joy, and she leaned against James for support. She had not only seen the Queen, But the Queen had seen her too. The Queen had smiled at her. Emma Thompson, a little girl with Down syndrome from a small town who had saved up all her pocket money to buy a special dress for this day. She looked right at me, Emma whispered in amazement. The Queen looked right at me and smiled. James felt a lump forming in his throat. In all his years of service, he had never experienced a moment quite like this one. He had helped create something beautiful and magical, something that would live in this little girl's memory forever. "You're very pretty in your pink dress," James said to Emma, his voice gentle despite his imposing appearance. Emma beamed with joy, her earlier disappointment momentarily forgotten. She had never imagined that one of the Queen's soldiers would notice her dress or even speak to her. "Thank you," Emma replied, her words careful but clear. "Mummy bought it special for meeting the Queen." She smoothed down the fabric with her small hands, proud to show off her outfit to someone so important. Sarah Thompson stood frozen in surprise. She had read about the Queen's Guard and knew they were famous for never breaking character or interacting with tourists. Yet here was this soldier, speaking kindly to her daughter as if Emma were the most important person in the crowd. James glanced around quickly. His fellow guards were still maintaining their positions, but he could sense their awareness of his unusual behavior. The crowd around Emma was still focused on the palace doors, waiting for the Queen to emerge, unaware of the small drama unfolding beside them. "Would you like to see the Queen when she comes out?" James asked Emma, already knowing what his next move would be. The little girl's eyes went wide with excitement, and she nodded so enthusiastically that her carefully arranged curls bounced around her face. "But I can't see over the big people," Emma said honestly, gesturing toward the adults in front of her. "Mummy tried to lift me, but I'm too heavy now." James looked at Sarah, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Ma'am, would you give me permission to help your daughter get a better view?" he asked formally, his military training showing even in this moment of breaking protocol. Yes, of course," Sarah stammered. "But are you allowed to do this? We don't want to get you in trouble." James smiled, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself during duty hours in years. "Some things are more important than rules," he said quietly. Then, turning back to Emma, he made his offer. "Would you like to come stand with me on the other side of the barrier?" Emma's gasp was audible even over the crowd noise. "Really? I can stand with you? Like a real guard?" "Like a real guard," James confirmed. He looked around once more, checking the positions of his supervisors. His commanding officer was stationed near the palace entrance, too far away to see what was happening at this section of the barrier. The other guards were focused straight ahead, though he was sure they were aware of his actions. Moving with decisive action, James unclipped a section of the barrier. The metal pieces were heavy and designed to create an unbreachable wall between the public and the restricted area. But James knew exactly how they worked. He created a small gap, just wide enough for Emma to slip through. The people around them suddenly realized what was happening. Cameras began turning toward them, phones started recording, and excited whispers spread through the nearby crowd. But James was focused only on Emma, who stood at the edge of the gap with wonder and slight fear in her eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," her mother encouraged. "The nice guard wants to help you see the Queen." Emma took a tentative step toward the opening, then stopped. "Will I get in trouble?" she asked James, her concern touching his heart. "No, you won't get in trouble," James assured her. "I promise. You're my special guest today." He held out his white-gloved hand to help her through the gap. Emma looked back at her mother one more time, seeking final approval. Sarah nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes as she realized what this moment meant to her daughter. Emma had faced so many barriers in her young life, so many situations where she couldn't participate fully or was left behind because of her disability, but today someone was opening a door for her instead of closing one. With complete trust, Emma placed her small hand in James's large one and stepped through the barrier. The crowd around them erupted in whispers and exclamations of surprise. Some people cheered, others took photos, but James ignored them all. His attention was completely focused on the little girl who now stood beside him in the restricted area. Emma looked around in amazement. She was now on the same side of the barrier as the Queen's Guard, standing where only authorized personnel were allowed to be. The view of the palace was unobstructed, the ceremonial pathway clear before her. "Now you'll be able to see everything," James told her, positioning himself beside her as her protector and guide. "When the Queen comes out, you'll have the best seat in London." Emma's joy was infectious. She stood as tall as she could, mimicking James's posture, and gazed toward the palace doors with anticipation that seemed to radiate from her small form. For the first time that day, she wasn't hidden behind a wall of adults. She wasn't struggling to see over obstacles or feeling left out of the excitement around her. She was exactly where she belonged, standing proud beside a Queen's Guard, waiting to meet her hero. The announcement came through James's earpiece at exactly 11:30 a.m. "Her Majesty will be departing for the state visit in 10 minutes. All units maintain positions." The crowd stirred with anticipation, phones and cameras rising like a digital forest above their heads. Emma pressed herself harder against the barrier, rising on her toes again in a desperate attempt to see over the crowd. "Is she coming now, Mummy?" she asked, her voice filled with renewed hope. Sarah nodded, though she knew their view would be blocked by the sea of people in front of them. James watched as Emma's mother tried one more time to lift her daughter, straining under the child's weight. The little girl managed to catch a glimpse of the palace doors for just a moment before her mother had to set her down again, breathing heavily from the effort. "I saw the door, Mummy. I saw the big door." "Emma," exclaimed, clapping her hands together. But James could see the disappointment creeping back into her expression as she realized that brief moment might be all she would get. Other tourists around them were growing impatient. A large man in front of Emma complained loudly about having to wait, blocking her view completely as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. Behind her, a group of teenagers were more interested in taking selfies than watching for the Queen, their phones held high above Emma's head. James felt his jaw clench beneath his ceremonial hat. These people had come to London as a casual tourist activity, something to post on social media. But for Emma, this was clearly the adventure of a lifetime. The difference in their attitudes was stark, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The palace doors began to open, and the crowd surged forward slightly, pressing against the barriers. Emma was pushed back by the movement of the adults around her, and James saw her stumble slightly before her mother caught her arm. "Mummy, I can't see," Emma said, her voice now tinged with frustration and sadness. "There are too many big people." Sarah knelt down beside her daughter, trying to comfort her. "Maybe we can find a better spot, sweetheart," she said, though they both knew it was too late. The crowd was too thick to move through, and every good viewing position had been taken hours ago. James's radio crackled again. "Queen's motorcade, approaching the main entrance. Maintain standard formation." His fellow guards stood like statues, their discipline perfect and unwavering. James had always prided himself on being just as professional, just as unmovable in his duty. But as he watched Emma's small shoulders slump in defeat, something inside him shifted. He thought about why he had joined the Queen's Guard in the first place. Yes, it was about duty and service to the crown, but it was also about protecting what the crown represented. And what did the crown represent if not kindness, compassion, and care for all subjects, especially the most vulnerable? Emma had stopped trying to see over the crowd. Instead, she stood quietly beside her mother, her hand reaching up to hold Sarah's fingers. The excitement that had radiated from her all morning was fading, replaced by the quiet acceptance of disappointment that children learn too early in life. James made a decision that would change everything. He took a deep breath and stepped away from his assigned position. It was a small step, barely noticeable to anyone except the guard standing next to him, who shot him a quick, questioning glance. Moving with purpose but trying to appear casual, James walked toward the barrier where Emma and her mother stood. With each step, he felt the weight of 15 years of training and protocol pressing down on him. Every instinct told him to turn around, to return to his position, to follow the rules that had governed his entire career. But he kept walking. As he approached the barrier, He could hear Emma's mother explaining to her daughter that sometimes things don't work out the way we hope, but that doesn't mean the trip was wasted. Emma nodded solemnly, trying to be brave for her mother. James stopped directly in front of them, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the little girl. Emma looked up at him with wide eyes, taking in his red uniform and tall black hat. She had never been so close to a real Queen's Guard before. "Hello," James said quietly, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. It was the first word he had spoken to a tourist in 15 years of service. Emma's face lit up with wonder, and her mother looked stunned that the stoic guard was actually speaking to them. The moment hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds, the world of rigid protocol and the world of human compassion. James knew there was no going back now. Whatever happened next would define not just this moment, but how he would remember his years of service for the rest of his life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as thousands of tourists gathered behind the metal barriers. Among the crowd stood 8-year-old Emma Thompson, her small hands gripping the cold steel as she pressed, her face against the railings. Emma had Down syndrome, and today was the most important day of her young life. Her mother, Sarah, had saved money for months to bring Emma to London. The little girl had been fascinated by stories of queens and princesses since she could barely speak. Every night she would ask her mother to read fairy tales about royal families, and she would fall asleep dreaming of meeting a real princess someday. "Mummy, when will she come?" Emma asked for the 10th time that morning, her eyes wide with excitement. Her speech was sometimes difficult for strangers to understand, but her mother knew every word perfectly. "Soon, sweetheart. The Queen will come out soon," Sarah replied, adjusting Emma's favorite pink dress and smoothing down her curly hair. She had tied a special ribbon in Emma's hair that morning, one that matched the dress she had bought specifically for this trip. Behind the barriers, the crowd was getting restless. People pushed and jostled for better positions, their cameras ready to capture a glimpse of royalty. Emma, being much shorter than the adults around her, could barely see over the heads in front of her. She tried standing on her tiptoes, but it was no use. Standing guard near the palace gates was Sergeant James Mitchell, a man who had served in the Queen's Guard for 15 years. His tall frame was rigid in the traditional red tunic and black bearskin hat, and his face showed no emotion as he maintained his post. James had seen thousands of tourists over the years, but something about the little girl caught his attention. He noticed how she struggled to see past the adults, how her mother lifted her up occasionally only to put her down again when her arms got tired. He watched as Emma's excitement never dimmed, even though she could see nothing but the backs of strangers. The palace protocol was crystal clear. Guards were not to interact with tourists, not to break formation, and certainly not to allow anyone past the security barriers. James had followed these rules without question for his entire career. His job was to protect the royal family and maintain order, nothing more. But as he watched Emma's unsuccessful attempts to catch even a glimpse of the palace, something stirred inside him. He remembered his own daughter, who was about the same age when she had visited him at work years ago. He recalled how her eyes had lit up when she saw him in his uniform, how proud she had been to call him her daddy. The crowd grew larger and more impatient as the morning progressed. Emma's mother tried lifting her again, but the child was getting heavy and Sarah's arms were tired. Emma didn't complain, but James could see the disappointment in her small face as she was lowered back down behind the wall of people. "I can't see anything, Mummy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the chatter of the crowd. "Are we too late? Did the Queen already go back inside?" James felt his heart skip a beat. In all his years of service, he had never been moved by a tourist situation like this. He told himself to focus on his duty, to ignore the little girl, and maintain his professional stance. But every time he looked in her direction, he saw her hopeful face turned upward, still believing that somehow she would get to see what she had come so far to witness. The other guards around him remained, perfectly still, their eyes fixed straight ahead. They had been trained to block out distractions, to be like statues in their posts. But James found it increasingly difficult to ignore what was happening just a few meters away from him. As the minutes ticked by, Emma's excitement began to fade into quiet disappointment. She leaned against the barrier, her small chin resting on the metal, and James could see her shoulders slump slightly. Her mother knelt beside her, whispering words of encouragement, but it was clear that their position in the crowd would never allow Emma to see what she had come to London hoping to see. James gripped his rifle a little tighter and tried to focus on his breathing the way he had been taught during training, but the image of the little girl's disappointed face was burned into his mind, and for the first time in his career, he began to question whether following protocol was always the right thing to do.